Isn't everything better with a little topping on it? Well, I'd like to show you my deck, which I bought some time back, the topping E32 lite. So you can see how small this deck is. There's my hand on top of it. It's just a little thing. But it makes some fabulous sound. Keep in mind, however, this is an inexpensive DAC at only $99, but I have no complaints about it. I don't know that I would buy anything cheaper. I did try something cheaper once and was not happy with it. So this little guy has a lot of features I like, especially at that price. Number one, it sounds good. That's pretty important to me. Um, and they don't have money to spend on DAC, so it's pretty important to me that it's inexpensive. It has a remote control. I'll put up a still picture of this. That's really nice. It has a preamp mode and a remote control. And if you don't need the preamp mode, you can put it just in DAC mode and bypass the preamp circuitry to make it even cleaner and purer sound. And it has nice connectors in back, which I'm going to pop up onto the screen and you can look at. So looking at it from the back, from the left, you have your right channel and left channel outputs. The yellow is for your coax in from your CD transport. Now you've got an optical in and you've got a USB in. And then you've got a DC 5-volt power supply. Now, that bears a little talking about right there. So, let's start with the power supply. Since this is 5 volts, it's made so that you can power it off basically anything that has a 5-volt output, like a phone charger. I don't completely recommend that though, for a couple of various reasons. It worked fine with all of my phone chargers except one. And with the one charger, the turn on, it automatically turns on when it gets a signal. It automatically selects the input. So if I turn on the CD player and hit play and it gets an input, it switches to the coaxial input, using it as a transport. But with one power supply, the turn on and turn off and switching stuff didn't work right. And when I checked the voltage output from the power supply, it was 4.5 volts, not 5. Now first, since I'm going to read you some stuff from Topping Zone website, I wanted to let you know that I looked at several, I didn't make any tests on this DAC myself. I looked at several tests in addition to the ones on Topping's website that other reviewers and things have done, and who have the equipment to make those kind of tests on a DAC, and they've all come out excellent and on par with the measurements that they have provided. And the one thing I thought was interesting was, if you don't know what jitter is, don't worry about it. Basically, it's not going to have any terrible effect, most likely, unless you got some very expensive equipment, in which case you're not using this DAC. You've undoubtedly using a $2,000 DAC or higher on up, depending on how good your equipment is. But the jitter performance on, which is considered a type of noise that can enter in the signal. It's not exactly that, but we don't need to explain it right now. But through the USB input, it was basically perfect. Through the coaxial input, there was a little bit of jitter, but it's still very fine performance. So not anything that's going to be hearable, like I say, unless you put it into a system that's way beyond anything that's reasonable for a $99 DAC. Okay. So that being said, I want to read something from their website here, still on our subject of the power supply. The discrete LNRD circuit filters out the noise of various 5-volt power input and provides stable power supply of ultra-low noise reference level for E32 lite. With this technology, the noise floor of the E32 lite is lower than 1.9 volts. So that takes care of the major problem with using these kind of chargers and things. Is that there can be RF noise in the circuit. So this ensures that it doesn't get any RF noise from those circuits. It does not ensure that everything is perfect. So I tested a bunch of my phone charger and things, and not a single one of them met the 5-volt level. Every one of them was low, some to a lesser and more of an extent. Like I say, the one that was half a volt low caused problems with the turn on and turn off and things like that. I mean, if you manually turned it on and off, it worked properly, but the automatic switching wasn't quite working because it probably didn't meet the required voltage level. So I checked around and I checked every phone charger I could find. I checked probably, well, at least 6 around here, if not more. Every single one of them was low. So I went and dug around in my junk bin in the back, and I dug out an old 5-volt power supply that was the type they call a brick. Linear power supply, meaning it has a transformer and a little regulator circuit in it and everything. So I checked that. 5 volts exactly, right on the dot. It's too bad modern things, you'd think they newer, they'd be better and they'd be more capable of supplying the required voltages and things, but it's just not the case. But my old linear power supply did perfect, 5 volts. I've been using it ever since. And I heard an improvement in both dynamics, a slight improvement in dynamics, and a definite improvement in bass going with the linear power supply. And with the LNRD circuit in there, it's probably not so much due to the fact that it's a linear power supply and it doesn't have that swishing noise, but probably more to the fact that out of all of them, it's the only one that met the actual voltage, and it was 5.0 exactly on the meter. It was perfect. So power supplies still make a difference, and I'd advise you, if you buy this DAC, to get a decent enough power supply that at least has a proper voltage and current. And a lot of these chargers don't have the proper voltage, and I didn't bother verifying if they have the proper current because none of them worked as well for me at all as this linear power supply. So let that be a thing to think about. And it's also, I'm sure, one of the reasons that this version is cheaper than some other models, because they don't have to supply a power supply. But they could be, you know, depending on what people use on it. It's unfortunate that users' choices for a power supply can have an effect on the performance, though they've mitigated that as much as possible. But low voltage, um, if the output power doesn't meet the voltage and current requirements, then the equipment just can't be expected to operate optimally. So if you want your best sound, I advise you to do that. And I thought that was a very good sounding DAC. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but I wanted to read you some of the specifications. And I'll just read them off their website real quick here for you. Okay, so some people are going to be interested. Here's the electronics part, technical part, to get to that a little bit right now. If you want the bottom line is, I love this DAC. I bought it. I paid for it. I'm not doing this review for any other reason than I bought it and I like it and I'm happy with it and I want to tell other people about it. Um, I have no complaints whatsoever. It suits my purpose ideally. So total harmonic distortion is a very low level, 0.0004%. The DAC chip is an AK4493S. Does high-res audio, supports up to DSD, which is direct stream digital, which is super audio CD, native up to DSD 512 native and PCM 32-bit at 768 kilohertz. Supports DSD direct mode. It has a switch on it for touch operation, and it has preamp, which some of these little DACs do not. You can buy some other DACs in this price range that will not let you control the volume, and I personally appreciate that because with my setup at the moment, I'm using an old school stereo amp and some a Parasound, but it's not real old school, but it's a Parasound amp, and I don't have a preamp hooked up to it at the minute. I'll talk about that later. Anyway, I really like the preamp function, so I'm using that to control the volume. So this is the lite version, and the specifications are almost the same as the not lite version. One of the main differences is the not lite version includes a headphone amplifier. So this E32 Lite uses one AK4493S chip. The E32, not the Lite version, used two of those digital chips, which is said to make it sound better. The signal to noise ratio is 121 decibels on this and 123 decibels on the non-light version, and both of those are outstanding figures. The dynamic range is really outstanding, especially for one at this price point at 121 decibels, and the dynamic range of the non-light version is 123 decibels. So as you can see, these are very close. The noise level on this version is less than 1.9 microvolts, which is very low. And the noise on the regular E32 version is 1.5 microvolts, so it's a little bit better there. And it's the non-light version is about $50 more. So they say this DAC chip has won wide acclaim from audio enthusiasts for its outstanding performance and top-notch sound quality. And the specs are excellent, as I said. They claim it is widely compatible with Windows 10, 11, Mac, Linux, the iOS Android system. I'm using it on Linux, and there's a but to that. While the equipment is plug and play, Linux isn't necessarily. So on my version of Ubuntu Linux, I had to get in there and specifically what most users would call hack a couple of files to get it to actually pass the high resolution files through the DAC instead of converting everything to 44.1 kilohertz and basically throwing away the high resolution part of the files to put it out as non high resolution as only CD quality. So if you want the DAC to actually work right, at least with Ubuntu Linux, you got to go in there and hack a file manually to tell it to let the stuff pass through. And I think this is really stupid. I think it ought to be applied to music the same way it is to hospital stuff. First, do no harm. But no, Ubuntu Pipewire and Pulse Audio routinely throw away all your high res stuff because they assume you only want to hear CD quality, period. That's for all those people, I guess, who think there's no difference, which is a whole nother argument that I'm not going to get into. Maybe another video. Um, anyway, you can make it work, and it's not all that hard, but you need to find the files and know how to go about it, which I've worked out. If anybody's interested in that, you can just uh, email me or something. If you want to know that, I can either do a quick response to an email, or if multiple people want to, I'll make a little video about that. So The jitter, they say, with excellent detailing, and it does have excellent details, the jitter of E32 Lite is as low as negative 153 decibels. So there's no worry about jitter affecting sound quality. The optical and coaxial input supports up to 24-bit, 192 kilohertz. I told you about that. Okay, so you can put it into DAC mode if you want. It has 6 filters, 6 output reconstruction filters, and there's a button on the remote control here. It's this FIR button there for the reconstruction filters, and you push that and you can switch through them, and they're honestly also good. I can hear small differences between them on my system, and my speakers aren't the most revealing. I could really use some decent, better, closer to high-end speakers. These don't quite qualify, but I could hear the difference. But to me, the difference between the FIR filters was so small. Well, FIR might be finite impulse response, or anyway. The reconstruction filters, the differences were so small, I couldn't decide I preferred one over the others. So I left it at the defaults. They all sound really good. What else? Is there anything else we need to know right off the bat? There's a headphone amplifier available for it, which is a matching headphone amplifier. The manual includes all the information, but it's one big sheet of really tiny printing. So keep that in mind, with multiple languages on it. So the documentation is kind of lacking. It's a $99 DAC, but you can get all the information on the website, and the website is set up really well. So you can always go back to that, which I recommend. Wear your jeweler's loop when you're trying to read the thingy. But yeah, I guess we're lucky they included one at all. Some products nowadays aren't. Basically, just go to this web page and get started. So a couple of things. The remote control is a little finicky about being aimed at the DAC. It's not horrible. It's a little finicky, and I think the reason is that they've set this LED in the end. They've back set it in, and so if you get it off at a little bit of an angle, sideways or above or below, the signal doesn't get to the DAC. So I think if that, I'm a do-it-yourselfer, if that bothered me enough, but it doesn't, because it's a minor deal, I'd probably just extend the wires on the LED out a little bit farther and poke it a little bit more out the end. When it's obvious why they didn't do that, because they don't want it to catch something and break off. They could have, a person might also take a Dremel tool, I don't know, make this a little, change the dish around that. Anyway, not a big deal. Otherwise, everything has worked perfect for me. I'll show you. I took a picture of the remote. You can see the left and right arrow buttons there. Those select the inputs. The plus and minus control the volume. Of course, there's a power button and a mute button at the top. On the E32 Lite, the line out, the headphones button, and the M button do nothing. FIR is the filters. The auto is the shut off. The way that works, if you want it to auto turn on or not. And then you've got brightness settings. So that's it for the DAC. It's small. I constantly sit it on black things and was losing it. So there's a little line across here, which is unique to mine because I pulled it off for the video, but I have a strip of shiny metallic tape I put over there so I can see it easier, especially since I like listening to music a lot of times with the lights low, and I can easily misplace it. So other than that, that's all pretty awesome. Let's see, the DAC. Now, sound quality. It sounds good. I don't have any more expensive DACs or anything to compare it to. So what I did for a comparison is I ran it from, I've got a Parasound CD player, and I ran it from my Parasound CD player through a home-built little Class A amp, which is built for minimal parts in the signal path. So it's a Class A single JFET input Class A stage um, running through that. I used it from its high impedance output to keep it so it just runs through the one stage. And so I used that and I ran the analog outputs from the Parasound through the preamp and then into the system that way. And I compared it with the sound of the Parasound being used as a transport straight into the little DAC because I had I couldn't quite make an apples to apples comparison because now we're comparing the preamp and the outputs, the audio outputs of the Parasound and stuff. I don't know what the outputs of the Parasound are rated at, but they're loud, the standard outputs, so they put out plenty of volume. So in the comparison with that setup, the DAC sound was very, very close. And from there, it's running into a Parasound new classic THX2 Ultra certified amplifier, which is a nice sounding little amplifier. So the DAC went out by a little bit. And where it went out was in detailing mostly. The transport used with the DAC was more detailed, definitely. There might have been some more differences. I didn't really ferret them all out because they were close enough to be like not to matter on my system. There was a little bit of difference in the bass, and I'm not sure. I couldn't quite decide. Either the DAC has a tiny bit less bass than the Parasound, or the DAC has tighter bass than the Parasound, and the Parasound bass might have been just a little loose. And that reminds me, I should probably check the capacitors on the Parasound and see how they're doing, because it's got a few years on it. Um, so yeah, it sounded real close, but I also know that the Parasound does not have. Let's say, I have an older Onkyo CD player which does not have a transport output because it's right when CD players were still being invented, and it's been refixed, and the opto isolators have been realigned and things. It had it has a little bit stronger bass than the Parasound output. So my conclusion is going to be that compared to more expensive DACs, and you might have to compare it to a lot more expensive, it sounds really good, and you might have to go up quite a bit. But my feeling is that with a more expensive DAC, you'd probably get that bass response, and it's probably, this is just a guess, mind you, entirely speculation. It's probably due to the op amp chip in this little DAC. And so that brought me to the point of wondering, you know, I've seen other pieces of equipment where the circuitry of the lite and the non-lite version of things sometimes has the same board, is just missing the components. So I thought, well, if I could buy another DAC chip and put it in there, or maybe do some op amp rolling. But I took it apart and looked in there, and I don't recommend taking it apart. There's a small, fine cable connected to the front panel. So you could accidentally pull that out, and then you might have a heck of a time getting it reconnected. I didn't make that mistake, so I didn't pull it out, but I took a look, and everything it is a single dedicated board for this. It is not the board of the other version. As far as I can tell, I couldn't just pop in another DAC or anything. Even if I was up on surface mount component soldering, which uh, I'd have to talk to my stepson to learn more about the surface mount soldering part. But yeah, so there's no point really in looking inside. I did notice that there's a surprising amount of larger capacitors than I expected. And probably part of that is the LNRD system, yeah, which reduces the noise and filters that out. Two of them look like they're right at the output stage. So I they're two pretty good sized. I don't remember the value. They might have just been 100 microfarad, but pretty good sized capacitors for this small of a little component. And I took that as a good sign for the circuit construction. And they are right in the output stage. And I'm guessing they're not on the output because most nobody uses outputs on a stage anymore unless they're trying to run a Class A stage, something like that. But my guess is they're power supply capacitors for that little op amp chip, and putting them there, yeah, it just seems like good design and construction. So I've been pretty pleased with it. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but this nice little guy, metal, not a plastic case. So that's awesome. The remote control is plastic, but what can you expect for $190, I mean, a $99 component? That's pretty impressive that it's even got a metal case compared to a lot of stuff I've fooled with in the past. So the sound quality passes muster. I wish I had something more expensive to check it on or some better speakers. You know, I might well have heard a bigger difference in the DAC between the DAC and the Parasound if because a Parasound is a few years old in its DAC technology and such. But who knows? You know, maybe one of these days I'll have one to compare it to. But I have been really pleased with it. I think it's a great little DAC. And personally, I'd recommend it to anybody who wants to buy a nice little DAC like this. No complaints whatsoever. Just watch the little power supply potential issue and make sure, I recommend checking it with a meter. Make sure you have a good quality one that meets the standards, 5 volts and 1 amp. And that's not a lot. 1 amp is a pretty small amount, but considering none of these met the voltage, I wouldn't doubt that they meet the amperage either, or they probably don't meet the amperage they're spec'd at either. So watch that on the power supplies. Like I say, it was a little bit better with the linear power supply. I noticed more bass and a little more dynamics, but that's one of the first things I noticed about this when I hooked it up. One of the first thing I noticed about it is the increased dynamics. So it worked great for my system. And I liken it to really putting a little topping on my system. Just improve the flavor. I suppose that's probably not an audiophile approved term, but hey, made my music a little bit better, and I had a remote control too, so I can't complain. My preamp has a manual pot, and I should talk about that on a video one of these days because you can use a cheap pot, you know, a $2 pot, and by using a couple of optocouplers and I homemade the optocouplers and used a light dependent resistor. So the signal only travels through a single light dependent resistor. And the pot only controls a DC voltage. And by controlling the DC voltage through, I actually used a little peanut lamp. And this has been going for like 22 years. So those things don't burn out fast. By doing that, it acts as a high pass filter, so any crackling or anything in the pot is totally removed. You don't have to worry about the quality of the wipers affecting the signal, anything like that, because you're only controlling the light that gets to a light dependent resistor, and that's what controls your input voltage. So solves all those bad pop problems. As far as I can tell, the little light dependent resistor is good sounding. In fact, one of the major manufacturers for an expensive, I don't remember who it was, but it was for about a $5,000 unit. I was reading about it in a stereophile one time, and they used that same technology with a single light dependent resistor. So I figure if it's good enough for a $5,000 high quality unit, it might have been a Carry Audio or one of those. Then I figured it was good enough for my little home built Class A preamp. So I honestly don't know why everybody's not doing that. I have another little preamp DAC that I bought. It has a little headphone output on it, and it was a cheap little thing. I thought, well, I just need a headphone output kind of thing. And it was disappointing in a bunch of ways. Maybe I'll do a review on it. First thing that happened is the pot broke. It's a sealed pot and it got a bump. And ever since it's been very crackly. You turn up the volume, it goes, which made it basically unusable. And it was within like a month of having bought it. And it just took a little bump. So I'm, you know, wondering why everybody doesn't do something like that with a pot circuit. It just eliminates all that garbage. Even if the pot were crackly, if it had the opto isolators on there, it wouldn't get through the sound and it would still control the volume just fine unless it was completely dead. So maybe I ought to make a video on that too. Anyway, I hope you all got something out of this. I think it's great. I recommend it to anybody who wants an inexpensive little DAC and who also cares about sound quality. Thank you for watching, and blessed be.